Okay, I think we are finally recording. Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
I think hey, before we get started, but I think what the issue is, my little mic that I use whenever I'm doing filming off my phone, I've been trying to use it for the audio with here and on my laptop. And even though I've tested it and it comes through just fine, for whatever reason, it throws everything off as far as how the video is going.
Well, you got to knock that off.
Yeah, I guess I do. But hi, thank you. Um, I guess to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second ever episode of Live Talks. And I am joined today with my special guests, my lovely partner and partner in crime as well, Ori. Um, and today's episode is called Autism and Me. And just having the relationship that I do with you and the experiences, I only really felt comfortable asking you to kind of share your insights. I know autism can be a very touchy subject for a lot of different reasons, and it's very valid. But I thought that if I could have an ethical, informative conversation with someone, then I would like to give you that opportunity to kind of put your own sense of awareness out there into the world to share with whoever decides to watch my videos. So thank you for being willing to do this.
You're welcome. I'm excited. I like to talk about it, but I can be an oversharer, so have to watch that.
Well, and just know that you can share whatever it is that you're comfortable with, and you don't have to share any more than what you're comfortable with. I mean, obviously we have no time limit, for the episode, the last episode, Grace and I went almost 2 hours. So it was a lot of fun, and I genuinely enjoyed that with her. So, and I'm happy with the way that Life Talks are going. Did you ever get around to watching the first episode?
No, I'm such a slacker.
Hun, it's okay. It is okay. You hear me talk about the ins and outs of everything I'm doing anyways. So I'm sure for you, it probably just feels like you already know what the episode is about, what all was said, and
I
everything.
mean, I'm pretty sure you've practiced all of your spiels on me anyway, so
Some of them, yes.
yeah.
Not all of them. Go ahead.
Okay. The conversation with Grace, I didn't hear much about, so I do want to listen to that eventually, but like some of your pep talks are things that you've already told me, so
That is true. I mean, you do have vacation coming up. Uh-oh. Burp, excuse me, guys, we just got done eating, so I'm dealing with dinner burps, and I humbly apologize.
yeah, she's a mess.
Yeah. Hey, you're dating this mess.
Yeah.
And then so let's go ahead and start with a bit of an introduction. Go ahead and introduce yourself, if you want to put out your pronouns, just so we can make sure that if anyone goes to talk about this episode, they are respecting who you are, and we will take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm Ori. I use they them pronouns right now, subject to change as I feel like. What else to say? I like the color purple.
What's life like for you right now?
Weird. I'm in between classes. I'm a full-time graduate student in the mental health counseling program at Wright State. Small plug. My professors are fantastic. So just trying to keep busy and find balance between busyness and recovery time. I tend to get burnt out really easily, so
Sure.
that can be kind of a challenge to reach that equilibrium point.
Sure. Absolutely. So you live a somewhat busy life then. I mean, obviously, I know what goes on in your life and I know what we have going on. I shared a little bit about this in the first episode of Live Talks. We do live a very busy life, you being a full-time student, and you're also doing part-time with DoorDash.
Mhm.
We are pursuing placement with a couple of my siblings, so we've got that going
Hmm.
on in our lives. And somewhere amongst the schedule of it all, you are still finding time to be yourself, and you're still finding time for family, and you're still finding time to just be Ori, which I think is genuine and fantastic.
Yeah, right now Ori is Stardew Valley. Who Ori is changes based on my current obsession, but right now it's Stardew Valley
That
again.
is fair. That is fair. I know there for a while when Animal Crossing came out, I kind of lost you to that a little bit.
Oh, you did. It was so bad.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's really funny that I got so sucked into a game that has almost nothing to do in it. Like, not to trash Animal Crossing, I'm sure people find, like, you can find things to do, but like I'm the type of person who likes to do quests and go on adventures, and there's none of that in Animal Crossing.
Right.
You basically have to self-direct, and I don't do well with that.
That's fair. I mean, but you did. How many hours do you think you put into it?
I mean, mm, let's see. I feel like there was at least 200 to 300 hours in Animal Crossing.
Yeah,
I,
and just to preface to everyone, like that's not an exaggeration. I mean, from sun up to sundown, obviously with responsibilities in between, but their focus there for a while was definitely Animal Crossing. I'm sorry, I got to make sure that my do not disturb is on, which it is not.
it's
So
not. We just,
no.
everybody heard that it wasn't.
Yeah, I just got an email. I assumed it still was from last time. But then again, that's my own fault for assuming. So,
Yeah. Well, and anybody who like games a lot, 200 to 300 hours is rookie talk.
right.
But I'm trying to find a better balance between gaming and my everyday life.
You're doing well. You are definitely doing well. And I
Thanks.
appreciate you. You're, uh-oh. Feel another burp. I want this footage to be like raw and everything. So there's no editing out these burps. They are just here. And unfortunately, you viewers have to deal with it. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Which I'll hit on this and then we'll just dive into it, but you have to deal with it all the time.
I mean, it's really not as bad as you feel like it is. I don't know. It's just like in normal bodily functions, like, oh, how dare you have a body?
Right.
Like,
How dare
what?
I?
Right.
Yeah, for someone who wants to advocate for such a human connection, how dare I be human in my efforts?
Uh-huh. Exactly. Exactly. Like, you want people to take care of themselves and be their best self and accept the things they don't like about themselves. Well, guess what? Having a body, you have to accept that and all of the functions that come along with it.
You're beautiful. Okay.
Mm.
So, Ori, Autism and Me. Before we get into the deeper aspects of it, I like to define things, as you well know. And, especially when it comes to serious talks such as this, I really want the viewers to be on the same page with us. So, in order to do that, I would like to go off of your definition of what autism is. So, could you please go ahead and put out what is your definition for autism?
So that's a little bit complicated
It
because
is.
there is an official definition of autism. The DSM-5 defines autism as a developmental disability. So what that means is that it's pervasive throughout the lifespan,
Mhm.
and it affects there are two categories used to diagnose. One is social behaviors, and then the other category is repetitive and fixed interests. So that's a general idea of what autism is by psychological definition. What it is to people who are actually diagnosed with autism can be a little bit different.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I kind of put you in the spotlight for that, because from your experience, I wanted to bring awareness to the fact that, yes, there is I guess you could call it a legal definition, if you will, for what autism is, going off of, how other people have defined it. But to my understanding, autism is it's not one, I don't want to say type, but there's no one specific set of autism. Autism can come in different forms.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one of the most frustrating parts for me is that I have not heard of a single autistic person yet. I haven't met very many, and most of my information comes from online communities.
Mhm.
But I have not heard of a single autistic person yet that does not have sensory challenges.
Sure.
But that's not a diagnostic criteria as far as I can recall.
Right.
And it's not a part of like the public consciousness of what autism is, but it can be one of the most debilitating symptoms for us.
Sure. Well, you saying for us is bringing me to my next question of, do you have autism? And if so, how did you get diagnosed?
So I am diagnosed officially with autism. I was diagnosed in 2015, I think,
Okay.
through my college. We have a Office of Disability Services at Wright State where I also did my undergrad. And I had suspected that I was on the autism spectrum because I, at the time, had a few online friends who were diagnosed with autism, and they were like, hey, you have a lot of similarities with us. You seem to struggle with this, this, and this. You might be autistic. And so I did a lot of research. Hyperfixation is one of the actual diagnosable criteria for autism. And so for a while there, autism was my hyper focus. And I was just
Sure.
like researching and learning and taking quizzes. And
Yeah.
so I eventually like really felt like I did have autism. And then I just happened to have the opportunity to pursue a diagnosis through my college as a way to get accommodations when I was really struggling with schoolwork.
Okay. All right. It's interesting how you pointed out hyperfixation, because of at the beginning of the talk, how we were talking about your fixation for Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
And now your focus is Stardew Valley.
Right. And like some sometimes a hyperfixation can be like a lifelong thing,
Mhm.
but for me, I tend to cycle through them. So I'll get really, really interested in something for a little while, devote all of my free time and energy to it, and
Yeah,
then I'll get bored of it and move on to something else. And so it really depends on the person how those fixations, I hate to call them fixations because that makes it sound negative, but it's like a hyper focus, I think would be a better
sure.
way to describe it.
Yeah. Um, so that actually raises a question for me. You're talking about cycling through different things that you're fixated on. What about relationships? Do you feel like that's contributed to just being with different people because you don't think you can stay focused on one?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right. That just now came to me. And we have never talked about that before.
No, we haven't. I'm a little caught off guard by that actually.
Yeah.
I just
Because, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but we've been together for over a year now. And
yeah.
according to your honesty with me, you're still very fixated with me. And you have shared with me that in past relationships, typically after 6 to 12 months is when it starts to wear off for you. So if if you do feel like hyperfixation has contributed to your dating life, why do you think it hasn't happened yet with me?
Um, so I have to really ponder that. I'm not sure I can give you an answer right
It's
now,
okay.
but my dating history is a bit more complicated than just, oh, I hyperfixate on an individual and
Right.
like fade out, because my relationship with you is actually the first healthy long-term relationship I've ever had in adult life or adolescence. Like I just did not understand how to have healthy relationships. And I was very easily taken advantage of, which does come from my social deficit and my difficulty reading other people and their intentions.
Right.
I tended to really struggle to pick up on like red flags. And now that I like can look back and see them, I'm like, oh yeah, that's obvious. But it wasn't for me at the time, because I tend to approach people as if they have the best of intentions for me, and they don't always.
Right.
So I feel like some of the issue with those relationships and the interest in them starting to fade was because of the toxicity and abuse, and not so much because of anything autism related necessarily.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think that's completely valid. And part of me wants to make a joke right now, but I'm not going to. But in all seriousness, like aside from the obstacles that you and I encounter together in terms of like maybe something financial, or maybe it's a life decision or whatever the case is, we have the communication skills to be able to talk through and work through it. And the only other part that's really stressful within our life is not knowing what it is that we want to eat each night.
Yeah.
So I can see what you're saying there, just because, whenever there's I don't want to say whenever there's an issue, because there's hardly any issues in our relationship. But whenever something does come up that does need to discuss, we're able to discuss that. We're able to come together and do that. So it does make a bit of logical sense as to why that would be the case, and why maybe it wasn't essentially hyperfixation in your past relationships that kind of wore off. It was just the sense of reality that kind of hit you of, oh my gosh, these things are existing and that's actually not okay. And now your subconscious may be becoming more conscious, and you're just like, about this person.
Yeah. Well, and actually, this leads into a little bit of one of the features of any mental illness, really, but autism especially, we have a like higher likelihood of burnout because of the way that our energy is and the way that certain things can drain us. And
Yeah.
so I got very burnt out in those relationships because I was providing more effort than I was receiving back.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen in this relationship. So I think that contributes to why things haven't faded for me.
That's completely valid. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I know this is a professional conversation that we're having right now for educational purposes for whoever watches this. But as your girlfriend, thank you. That means a lot to hear that validation. So I appreciate you.
Of course.
But you talking about burnout leads me into the next question. What challenges do you have with autism?
Oh boy. So we'll start with daily challenges, like things that I experience every day, and then I'll kind of go into some of the more long-term challenges, I think.
As you're comfortable with.
So every day I struggle with some form of hypersensitivity, whether it's sensory overload. I tend to get very overstimulated by auditory input. And so I often find myself getting irritable or frustrated, and I've had to learn how to identify what's going on in my body and try to figure out what that irritability is coming from.
Mhm.
And of course, you know that that's compounded by the fact that I've just recently started hormone therapy.
Yeah,
And so that adds some irritability on top of the sensory input.
sure.
But like day to day, that is a huge challenge for me because I'm always having to manage my sensory input and evaluate, do I have more energy to do something else, or am I too overstimulated? Have I been doing too much for a week and then I need to take a break because I've used all of my energy and can no longer sustain the rate of activity that I had been committing to. So that is, it's not necessarily autism specific, but mine does come from being on the spectrum. And so that is like my daily challenge. But I feel like a lot of people with anxiety disorders in particular also struggle with overstimulation.
Yeah,
And anybody with a mental or physical illness or disability tends to have to manage those daily activities more closely than somebody who doesn't experience that.
sure. Absolutely. I mean, speaking in the position as your girlfriend, and it's not just something that's exaggerated. I want to put that out there for everyone. And a little bit of a backstory, just real quick, is that in my research before getting with Ori, and it wasn't that I was pursuing trying to understand autism, it was just in other areas of research that I had done, and autism would get brought up in various different examples. It was more so to the concept that autism gets excused for a lot of things and that there's this whole stigma around it. And so just from that, that is all the knowledge that I had about it. So from there, that told me to be cautious whenever someone says that they have autism, to kind of do a thorough personal analysis as to like what that means for the person. Is this legit, or are they just trying to use that as an excuse with something? And that's very damaging. I regret having that perspective because in the very beginning, as you remember, I expressed to you my caution with you telling me about that. Not that I didn't want to believe you or trust you, because especially in the beginning, you had given me no reason not to trust you. But it was something that I applied caution to. And then just through experience together, through more education from you, and understanding that, okay, this is actually valid in these points. The whole stigma of it being excused for things, not throwing that out. I'm not saying that doesn't happen with certain individuals for whatever the reasons are, But in your case, in terms of like when you were given examples of how your daily life is, and we're talking about burnout and we're talking about you having to manage how much energy you have for things, that's very real. And I kind of want to, if you're okay with this, I kind of want to use a very vague overview of the night with the pesticides.
Absolutely. But I do want to touch on something before we give like a concrete example, because what you said about like autism being used as an excuse, it touches on something that's really important that I feel like I can sort of shed light on.
Please do.
So that tends to happen to, and I'm going to use these terms and then explain why you shouldn't use these terms.
Okay.
That tends to happen to people who are labeled high functioning autism. It used to be Asperger's. And that diagnostic criteria was eliminated in the DSM-5. I think they still use it in like Europe with the ICD textbooks. But in the United States, Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis that they give out. It's just autism spectrum disorder level 1, which is the highest functioning, and then level 3 is the lowest functioning. So when people talk about high functioning or low functioning, all they're generally like categorizing is communication skills, how well you can speak, how well you can verbalize your thoughts and communicate to the world around you. Level 3 is like highest support needs, is how they list it in the DSM now, but it tends to be a diagnosis given to people who maybe never were able to grasp toilet training, have lots of like external meltdowns, can't speak, and things like that. So when you talk about autism being used as an excuse, that tends to be placed on people who don't look autistic, like me.
Right.
My father to this day does not believe that I am actually autistic. He actually questioned me until I told him that I had a diagnosis from a psychologist that classified me as being on the autism spectrum. And he still doesn't, he just doesn't put a lot of validity in it because I don't look autistic. I am very verbal. I mean, you guys can see some of the stuttering and the ums and the likes that go on as I try to process my thoughts. But overall, I'm very articulate, and I don't have a lot of social deficits that are apparent in my daily interactions until you really get to know me. And I think Bella can attest to that. And so when people present like that, it's very easy to see, oh, they're just using autism as an excuse.
Sure.
When generally people who, and I'm not saying that it never happens because I'm sure it does, and I'm not going to get into the reasons why people might use autism as an excuse.
Right.
But overall, like, we have to fight so much harder to get support as someone who doesn't look autistic.
Yeah.
And so I had to have a lot of conversations with you about why I do the things I do and why I feel the way I feel before you came to that conclusion. And most people never have that exposure. So it can be a little bit frustrating at times, but I like to meet the challenge head on and then educate people where I can. And that's something that I'm able to do for those who maybe can't do that as often or at all.
Do you feel like having this episode sort of creates that opportunity?
I think so. I
We
feel
hope so.
like, yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't want to listen to those of us classified as high functioning, especially parents with children who have really high support needs,
Right.
tend to think that we're just like, we don't know what they're going through. But we, especially in the autistic community, those of us who are verbal, who can communicate, who process language well enough to advocate for ourselves and for others, it's our job to advocate for those who are maybe talked over by, I'm going to use a term, and it basically is just the term for people who don't have autism.
Mhm.
So allistic people
Okay.
tend to talk over us and think that because they're raising a child with autism that they know better than actually autistic people. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to kind of speak out, and not every person with autism is going to be the same, but not every person without autism is going to be the same either. So I can only share my experience and hope that others hear what I'm saying and can learn from it.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, that's really important. And I'm glad that I ended up asking you to do that. Well, to do this because I do want this episode to create a sense of awareness for autism, and hopefully individuals with autism can share this with those within their lives, and those within their lives who do not have autism can have a sense of community, and those with autism can have a sense of community. Like you can see the reality of bringing the individuals together who do and do not, and how life can exist. So
Yeah.
I'm just very thankful for you for doing this with me. And just taking a quick step back into when we were talking about burnout a little bit, and how it can take a little bit of time to process the reality of something. Um,
Yeah.
so there's not been probably less than one handful of times. I could probably count maybe 2 or 3 times where I've had experiences with you where like the severity or the reality of something didn't click right away. And that was something I was able to observe. And so, with your consent, I kind of want to do a vague overview of the night that we came home to all the pesticide, if that's okay.
Yeah. Go for it.
Um, so we had a small bed bug issue, and with that came pest control, and with that came a whole bunch of pesticide. Like, we were not expecting all of this. When I say that it looked like it had snowed in here is an understatement. It was very intense. If my memory serves, I believe we were allowed to come back in after 6 o'clock that night.
Yeah.
And we had just went out to dinner, me, you, and our roommate. And we came back and found everything as it was. My mentality is, okay, this is late at night. This is I think it was a Friday night. We are not going to get all of this done in a livable condition in one night. And we can't sleep here because of just how overwhelming the pesticide was. It was very damaging internally. And that had not clicked for you right away. Your idea was, okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. It was, okay, let's go ahead and get this done and over with a little bit. It was, we can do this. And the reality of like how thoroughly we had to clean things had not set in. Would you agree with that?
So yes and no.
Sure.
From from I can see why like it seems that way from an outside perspective.
Sure.
But what was actually going on with me was like very detailed. So we walked in to our home, and my expectation was that, so the exterminator had told me there would be a little bit of dust. Those were his exact words. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. We walked into an apartment that was completely covered in white powder. And this is not just like, so dust, when you think of dust, it's like the stuff that you wipe off of your dresser when you haven't cleaned it for too long.
Yeah.
This stuff was not that. When it touches your skin, it's sticky but intensely dry at the same time. And for somebody with sensory issues, walking into a place where there's literally nothing that you can touch except that, it completely bombarded all of my senses. Like, we couldn't breathe without coughing. We couldn't touch anything without it. Like, I didn't even want to touch myself. And
Right.
so for me, the last thing I wanted to do was to have this complete and instantaneous sensory overload and then also have to be away from my home.
Sure.
And so my mindset was like, I just need to be able to sleep in my own bed.
Understandable.
And I couldn't focus on anything but that, because I was a hair's breadth away from having a full-blown meltdown.
Right.
Which, if you continue the story, we can talk
shall.
about what that looks like.
Indeed. And first, I just want to point out, thank you for being more thorough and more first person on what it was you were going through. I guess I would say that me describing your position was how it was perceived at me. So that's part of the reason why I sort of tossed that in there, because I was hoping you were going to correct me, because I remember you explaining it. And that's why I was doing it from like the outside perspective of what it could look like. So thank you for correcting that. That's
No,
what I was hoping would happen.
I thought it was like a really like good dichotomy to draw. Like, this is what someone without autism sees, and this is what is actually happening in the mind and body of someone experiencing these situations. So it was good.
Thank you. All right. So, continuing the story, I perceived how severe this was. Your average soap and water with a rag is not working. The Fabuloso, it's not working with just one wipe. It's going to take some serious scrubbing. When I say this was in every room in the house, I am very serious about that. So it being what was going on 7 o'clock, 7:30, I'm pointing out to Ori, we're not going to be able to do this tonight. I'm not sleeping here. This is a bit triggering for me, just in terms of some of my childhood trauma with like dirty houses and things like that. Like, I can't stay here tonight. But the response that I had gotten, I should say, the response I had gotten from you when I was pointing that out was to go ahead and go then, that you weren't leaving. So do you want to kind of touch base on why that response happened before we go further?
So at this point, like, I was not in a rational headspace. Like, the worst thing that could happen to me at that point was more change and more like difficulty, unfamiliarity, etc. Like, I was grasping on to like the one thing that was keeping me from having a meltdown, which was I have to sleep in my own bed. But you had told me before we knew what we were looking at that having a dusty apartment might be triggering for you. And so I was trying to find a way to make both of us comfortable. even though my way of making myself comfortable was not going to work. And I just couldn't see that.
Right.
So my response was, well, you can go stay in a hotel and I'll stay here and clean.
Right. Which I was not okay with.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and from someone who doesn't have autism to be given that response, when it comes to my relationships, honesty and communication is a very important thing. So the person who I had fallen in love with for their virtuous and ethical and rational mindset, had just responded to me with, well, you just go ahead and go and I will sleep here. And that sort of like dynamic on how we're resolving this, I just did not expect. So at first I said no, I'll just go ahead and continue. And I was not happy. I started to express emotion that I had become upset, and was trying to get things done. And then it got to be around 8:30-ish, 8:30 or so. And there was no end in sight with this within the night, which overall it did end up taking us all weekend, and we're still finding little bits here and there that we're cleaning up. But the part that's important to note here is that in order for me to get Ori to come back to reality, one of two things were going to happen for me. Either one, I'm going to leave and you will come to your senses on your own, and then we will reconvene and you will come to the hotel because you will understand that you're not going to be able to do this for the night. Or two, I can try to break through that wall that's up. I can ask to talk to you, and I can be very bluntly honest with you while carrying sympathetic intentions to kind of understanding a little bit of what you're going through, not exactly. Try to sit down and get you back to rationality a little bit. And that's what happened. I asked to speak with you alone in our bedroom because we had a roommate at the time. And I sit you down and I, just pointed out, you're not thinking clearly, you are not listening. And this is, as your girlfriend, I need you to understand the reality of what you just told me when you said, all right, you go and I'll stay, and what that means. And I asked you to make a decision. All right, is that honestly what you want? Because we can follow through with that, but then we're going to have a talk within the future about our relationship, because that is such a red flag for me. Or two, I need you to come to your senses a little bit and try to understand where I'm coming from and let me help you and help us. So before we continue, when I had done that for you, what was it like?
I don't remember much
That's okay. It's
about it.
okay.
And that is just a product of like the intense overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I can remember when I was still grasping onto control. I can remember like how I reacted. But I can't remember much of what happened when I was because it did. So when you sat me down, at first I was just, it kind of felt like being gut punched because I had been moving at this very rapid pace to keep myself on track, and you basically like closed the door in my face and I ran headfirst into it. So
Yeah.
it was a very like intense feeling. But like I don't remember what my thoughts were because at that point I just completely lost all control of my ability to stay composed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going off of that, so what had transpired was after that talk, and I was going to continue the conversation of the reality of what the situation is and what this means. is when you had broke. It was when sort of like you started to come to your senses a little bit as you were listening to what I was saying, sort of like feeling the emotion and the severity from me as I'm talking to you. And like, we don't yell at all at each other or anything like that. But if we do feel like we need to get a point across, we will access a more of a stern tone with each other so that the other one knows where the other one is coming from and the level of severity from that. Because you and I will argue with you, not argue, but we will debate with each other just to sort of get to that outcome. But in moments where like, no, we don't have the time for this debate, and now I'm going to stern my tone a little bit because I need you to understand how serious I am. That is what had happened. And the wall came crashing down and you started to sort of hyperventilate and panic a little bit because of the overstimulation, realizing that you had this abundance of pesticide all over you and the textures that your skin had been touching, the textures on your fingers as you currently sat there and everything. And it finally clicked for you that, at least, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that, well, no, we can't be here. And now you need to shower. And this is going to be even more of a process to get it off, more of a process to get to a hotel and everything like that. And, continuing from that, you had gotten in the shower and you were panicking, and you were apologizing because the reality of what you had said to me had set in, and that's not how you intended it because your perspective was in a different direction. And there was a whole bunch of tears, which broke my heart. I had never seen you cry like that until that moment. I still can vividly picture that in my head, and it crushed me to see you in such fear and panic and worried about you and I, and then worried about the home and worried about everything in general, when in reality, you and I were completely fine. But because I knew on some level that you didn't mean it like that there was more factors at play here, but it was just the matter of having the time to get to them, because you're not that type of person. But everything came crashing down for you all at once. And for me, it perceived to be very overwhelming, very, very emotional, even physical for you. And we had to spend the next 30 to 45 minutes getting you showered, getting you scrubbed, trying to find some sort of clothes that were bagged up and everything that you could put on, and for us all to get to the hotel, which is what happened. And the whole point of me sharing this experience and Ori and I dissecting it is because this was a real event that happened between the two of us. And it's important to understand that from an individual who does not have a diagnosis of autism within an individual who does, there, as they say, are two sides to the story. And there are two perspectives to the situation when you have two different individuals. How things are to one person may be completely different to someone else. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. Sure, there is understanding and not excusing, but in this situation, when the individual cannot consciously help how their perspectives are, when the individual cannot consciously help how they are perceiving things or how they're thinking, as the partner of someone who experiences that, you do sort of take on that responsibility. You do kind of look after that a little bit. And it's not because like you are their caretaker or anything like that. It's just something that you would do for anyone else, hopefully. But even more so if someone has that sort of experience within their lives, because it's hard. And it can be hard to know what may be a cause of the autism versus how the person is outside of the autism. And that's all situational. We're not going to go down all these avenues. But in that moment for us, it was an experience for me, because that was the first time I had ever experienced that with you, where I legitimately had to put my foot down and say, hey, listen, this is a situation and you need to make a decision, because this is too much and you're not thinking clearly.
Yeah. Well, and as you well know by now, I manage my life very carefully
Very carefully.
so that I do not get like that anymore. Because I used to have, and I'm not sure if I shared this with you, but I used to have meltdowns growing up. I didn't
Yeah,
understand what they were. And they just really seemed like angry outbursts.
right.
But as an adult, I've curated my life very specifically. I manage my sensory input and I do everything possible so that those externalized expressions of overwhelm don't happen anymore. I tend to be more of a shutdown person, to
Sure.
where I can't really think about anything or process it right away, but it stays internal, which is an alternative to meltdowns that a lot of autistic people experience that can make it harder for our autism to be recognized.
Yeah.
So while I tried to educate you about the fact that I was autistic and sometimes meltdowns do happen, there's nothing that I could have done to actually prepare you for the reality of it, because you don't know what it looks like until you see it.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so like that was honestly part of why I was apologizing, because I realized in that moment that I I had lost all control over my thought processes from the moment we walked in that door.
Right.
But it was so sudden and so intense that I had also lost the capacity to communicate what was happening within me. And I felt a lot of shame about that, because
Sure.
we do pride ourselves on our communication
Yeah.
and our openness in our relationship. And so it felt very much like a failure that I
Sure.
had not been able to communicate to you what was happening to me.
And in that moment, I did not perceive it as a failure. And obviously, to this day, I don't perceive it as a failure by any means. Um, if I perceived it as anything from the immediate response from you, it was just shock, because I did not expect such a response from you, from someone who I value highly with their logic and their got the tears coming out, with their
A little
logic
bit.
and their sense of ethics and rationality. Though, just like we're experiencing right now, you also are very high when it comes to emotions as well, which is something that I love about you. Um, but yeah, so just putting that experience out there for everyone, and thank you for letting me do that, because moments like that can happen, and it doesn't mean that anyone's at fault, and I think that's going to help eliminate those who are trying to decide where you're at in the stigma of things, is accepting that not everything may be as it seems at first when it comes
Yeah.
to autism, and that there might be some level of understanding that you will have, even if it's not right away. And I think that's very important to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I mean, it's something that I've gotten better at over the years as far as like communication, but there are times that it does fail. There are times
Mhm.
when I completely accidentally say something that hurts your feelings,
Yeah.
because I've had to work very hard to create a filter on my thoughts. Like the brain to mouth filter that most people come built with, they come out of the factory with it installed. Mine was missing.
Right.
Um I remember a time when I was a kid, and I'm so sorry, Mom, if you ever watch this. I remember that I told my mom she had a nose like Count Olaf
I remember that talk.
from the Series of Unfortunate Events movie, and it just hurt her feelings so much. And I didn't understand why at the time, but because I just thought I was being honest, but I had to learn the difference between honest and too honest,
Right.
because certain comparisons can cause somebody to feel more insecure rather than simply being a statement of what I see. So I've had to work very hard to build that, but it does malfunction every once in a while because
Sure.
there was no quality control on it or anything, just built from scraps. And so going with the factory analogy here.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've experienced those comments at times.
Yeah. Yeah. And when they happen, obviously in the moment, in whatever way it bothers, it might, sometimes does, but we talk about it,
Yeah.
and and I don't want to seem like we have this perfect relationship. We don't, but it's one of the things that, like Ori said, we do pride ourselves on is our communication within our relationship, because it's part. I mean, it is part. Anything that we need to discuss, we do. We may not always recognize what it is we're going through, and we take time for that, but we do end up getting to that communication. And that's one of my most favorite things about being with you is communication. um but no, I mean, that's just that does happen. That does happen. So you just talk about it, you work through it, in whatever ways that you have to. But there's moments when it's okay to take something personal, and there's moments where it's okay to not take it personal. And because there are other factors at play that could be giving me the emotional response that I am experiencing, we do have to talk about it, because it could be my hormones. It could be me just being a bit more sensitive for the day, the week, the month, the year, whatever. And it may have just came off that way. And it's that whole, as Grace and I were talking about in the last video, a bit of cognitive dissonance, where like logic may be higher than emotion, or emotion might be, you might be leaning more towards emotion than logic at the time. And that can happen. And you and I both being on hormone therapy, different therapies, but both being on hormone therapy, sometimes we just go a bit back and forth. And
Yeah.
and it's definitely a factor. But we still have so much more to cover, so we need to move on to the next topic, because it is getting late for you and I.
Yeah. I got to
So
get my next Fauci ouchie tomorrow.
yeah, that you do. So we've talked about some of the serious parts of autism, and some of the more moments that weren't easy. I mean, this is all serious, but the moments that weren't easy together. But what are some things that you like about being autistic?
So, one of the things that I really like is that now, if you asked me to define how this is true, I wouldn't be able to. I don't know exactly like details,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always sort of had a different perspective than that of the people around me. It's not that I see more things than other people necessarily, but I do notice different things, different details compared to what non-autistic individuals tend to notice. And for me, that has benefited me a lot throughout my academic career and has allowed me Sorry, you froze up.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I was just making sure that I wasn't talking to an empty Zoom call.
No, you're fine.
That has allowed me to like really excel with my academic career. I had a paper in my undergrad that was one of my professors had me do a presentation at this event at Wright State for outstanding research because of my own unique perspective that I wouldn't have without my autism.
Sure.
I see the world the way that I see the world because of the way that I process all of the information that comes through my brain. And I can't separate that out from the autism because the autism contributes a large part to that. When we say it's a developmental disability, that also means that it affects in a very fundamental way how we interact with the world. And so you'll find that autistic people don't necessarily think that we're disabled by virtue of being autistic. It's more so how society is built and treats us because of the autism that is disabling, which is called the social model of disability. And so we don't tend to identify as people with autism. We identify as autistic people because not only can we not separate it out from who we are, but many of us think it's a benefit. It shapes our perspectives, it allows us to see different things, and we provide a lot of value to the world because of the autism that we have.
I'm in awe of you sometimes, I swear. You are truly wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank
You're welcome. All right, we can't be too cutesy right now.
I know, you're making me blush. It's rude.
All right, so last couple of items here. What would you like to say to someone who might be thinking that they're autism or might be autism and is kind of feeling alone?
Autistic.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
I
Autistic.
am the autism.
You indeed. And please forgive me. I am so tired right now. But
Oh, no, it's okay.
to someone who might be autistic, what would you like to say to them if they're feeling alone, or to someone who thinks that they might have autism?
So I have a couple of things to say.
Please.
Um, full disclosure, I'm going to touch a little bit on diagnosis in this just because
Okay.
it's relevant. And I feel like I'm not sure if your views have changed on it or not, but I do feel like I need to share my perspective as someone coming from within the autism community.
That's why you're here.
So if you are autistic and you're feeling alone, I understand because I also feel that way a lot. I mean, barring potentially my siblings, but we're not even like sure that they are autistic. They just have some autistic traits, but barring them, I don't know any other autistic people. I the autistic people who helped me come to a diagnosis are no longer in my life for various reasons, and my sole sense of community comes from online like advocates that I follow. I use Facebook a lot, and so I follow people who talk about their own autistic experiences. I follow this one phenomenal page of this mom whose daughter is autistic, and she's done so much to learn about what autistic people have to say, to elevate their voices,
Yeah.
and to advocate for her daughter. And that's my only sense of community right now. So if you're feeling alone, that's okay, but it's also okay to find your autistic community where you can, even if it's only online. And then for people who think they might be autistic, if at all you have the opportunity to pursue a diagnosis, I wholly support you. But if you can't get one, or if your mental health professional for whatever reason doesn't believe you, that's okay too. I know that a lot of autistic people have to be self-diagnosed, especially those of us who tend to blend in with neurotypical people more, because autism doesn't always look like Sheldon Cooper or The Good Doctor or the stereotypical media depiction. Sometimes it looks like a teenage girl who's got angry outbursts and seems to have really high anxiety. Hello, me. Um, it so if you've done your research and you feel like you have autism and you want to be part of the autistic community, I don't know very many autistic people who would exclude you. A lot of us support self-diagnosis just because the mental health care system in the United States is so crappy that sometimes the only way you can get support is through community, and the only way you can find your community is through self-diagnosis.
Sure.
And so I'm saying this as someone who's going into the mental health professional. If all you have is a self-diagnosis, but you're 100% certain, you're
About autism.
welcome. About autism, yes, then you're welcome in our community.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. And you mentioning that you weren't sure if my opinion about diagnosis have changed or not, because I am someone who is adamant and very cautious, adamant to be cautious of self-diagnosis, just because there is a lot of ethical concerns with that, in terms of, well, it's situational, and I'm not going to go down that right now. We are running closer on our time limit here. But I am someone who is cautious when it comes to self-diagnosis. But I will also put out there that through my experience of being in this environment with Ori, and through my own knowledge of how the healthcare system is, I will say that through my own knowledge and experience, you know, if you do get a misdiagnosis that you don't feel like is accurate, if you are able to get a second opinion, please try to do that. Get a third opinion, get a fourth one, however many it takes for you to find comfortable, for you to feel comfortable with what it is that you're experiencing. And if all you are left with is self-diagnosis when it comes to autism, then I would definitely support that, because there's so much back and forth about it within the world today. And that's very unfortunate. That is very unfortunate, but it is a reality. So if that is a reality, and if it is your reality, then your reality is your own. If you feel very strongly, if you feel very confident that you have autism and that you are autistic, then definitely follow your heart on that self-diagnosis. And I absolutely support that.
So I do want to share a short anecdote about
Please.
that, just because my first experience, I shared that I was evaluated through my school and I had that opportunity, but my first evaluation was through a neuropsychologist, which is who they technically send you to for developmental disabilities. And this was an older man who had been practicing for many years. I mean, I would guess that he started with like the DSM-3 maybe even DSM-2 as far as his diagnostic criteria. And when I told him that I suspected I had autism in the initial meeting before he had done any evaluations, he told me no, that I didn't, and proceeded to evaluate me for, he just did a general battery of neuropsychological tests, nothing specifically for autism. And he ended up diagnosing me with nonverbal learning disorder, for which I did not match at least half of the criteria.
Mm.
And so by sharing that anecdote, it is very common, especially for people who are assigned female or perceived as female, to be misdiagnosed, because our typical view of autism is cisgender white men, because that's who all of the studies are done on, because they're the primary population that we've associated with it all the way back to the beginnings of defining this disorder.
Okay.
So when you're misdiagnosed, a rule of thumb that I would offer to people is, if you have enough in common with the community that you're self-diagnosing, that they accept you into that community, then your self-diagnosis is valid. Like, if you have the criteria, if you meet the criteria, and regardless of whether or not a professional who's maybe only met with you for 30 minutes agrees with your self-diagnosis, if you fit more with that community than you do with any other community, then who am I to say that you don't belong?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of really good information, I feel like, has been shared here, and experiences. And these were personal experiences for both you and I. And I wanted to be vulnerable and a bit transparent about them for the purpose of educational. I mean, I hope none of this has come off to anyone, or especially to you, dear, of like pointing fingers of right and wrong, or who's to blame in any of it. So I hope none of it has come across that way, because I want all of this to be educational. And I feel like we have achieved that tonight.
Yeah.
Sort of to close this, go ahead and put out there that if you do feel like you don't know where to go in terms of what it is that you're experiencing, and you feel like you might be autistic, please do your research. Please reach out to resources. There are communities out there all across Facebook, all across whatever popular social media. You can always find some. But real quick, just to end this, you were adamant about one organization specifically not to go to, for resources that advocates for autism. It is based off autism. It is funded from autism. But you had shared with me and advocated that this organization is actually very damaging to the community. So would you please enlighten everyone about that?
So this conversation actually happened when Isabella was designing her flyer for this, like the advertisement for this video. And I looked over to stare lovingly at her and noticed that she had picked a ribbon with puzzle pieces. And so those of you in the autistic community probably know where I'm going with this, and this may also be news to other people. The puzzle piece originated with Autism Speaks. That is also the organization that does Light It Up Blue and Autism Awareness Month. And this organization is very, very damaging to autistic people. They are primarily run by people who are not autistic. They're supported by parents of kids with autism who do not also have autism. And just the entire organization is very, they speak about us, but they don't speak to us. And autistic people have repeatedly called them out, have told them what they're doing is wrong, and they don't listen. They support a type of therapy that is outright abusive. It's called applied behavior analysis. And it's ABA for short. But ABA therapy, basically, it's rewards and punishments to try to eliminate autistic behavior is what the therapy does. You often find ABA therapists that restrict stimming, which is a self-stimulatory behavior that autistics do. Most of the time it's fairly harmless, although it can drift into self-harm, and that does need to be worked with. But they tend to restrict harmless stimming. They don't always allow safe, like, sensory environments for the kids they work with, and it's abhorrent. I've heard many autistic people speak about how traumatizing ABA was for them, and the fact that Autism Speaks still supports this therapy is just disgusting. So I don't support them. I don't support their symbolism. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because what I wanted to kind of throw out there as an alternative, I do follow this organization called the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. They have a pretty little symbol. It's like sort of like a circle, but it's got like rainbow lines that make up the circle, and they're run by autistic people for autistic people. And so Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is definitely a better organization to support and take information from if you need somewhere to look to as far as autism information. And lastly, instead of, for April, Autism Awareness Month, I would suggest Autism Acceptance Month, which is what autistic people actually advocate for, because we don't just need people to be aware of autism. We need people to accept us for who we are and stop trying to change us and make us more compliant so that other people can be more comfortable with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll cover this and then we'll have to close this up and everything. But one of the best things that you can do for someone, and this is talking about autism, but this is talking about in just other areas of life as well. You can use this sort of mentality. Keep in mind that there's no such thing as one general normal. You can have ideals of how you want something to look, of how you want someone to behave, but no two experiences will ever be the same, and there will never, ever be one general standard for normal that is out there into the world. So instead of trying to change something about someone, and right now we're on the topic of autism, instead of trying to change those autistic behaviors, accommodate them, understand them, incorporate them in your day-to-day life. Now, if the aspect of stimming, like Ori brought up, is self-harm, yes, use your common sense here. That is not healthy. Get that checked out. But look for alternatives. Stimming doesn't need to go away. Find a different way of stimming. that does not lead to self-harm. Stimming is not a problem. I observe it with Ori. I've observed it with several different people. There's moments I'm catching myself stimming from time to time. Stimming is not a problem, but what is a problem is trying to remove a very important reality about an individual, something that they can't help, something that they cannot control. And that is what the fight is partially against as well. So please keep that in mind, take that with you, think of that in other areas of your life, because that is insanely important, people, very important. And I cannot stress that enough. That's why I'm more excited right now. But overall, thank you, Ori, for doing this with me. And whoever's watching this, I apologize for how tired I appear to be right now. I am experiencing some hormone fatigue, and it is pretty late. But you know, Ori, overall, my heart goes out to you. And aside from the fact that I'm about to walk out of this room and go see you, it does mean a lot to me that you were willing to do this with me, to put yourself out there for however many viewers, 1,000, however many viewers that we achieve with this. It does mean a lot to me that you were willing to be as vulnerable and validating as you were about things, because it's not easy to do. For one, when you're dating someone who has to put a lot of their life already out there to achieve being a aspiring speaker, influencer, motivator, innovator, you know, I have to share my stories and I already put a lot out there, but, you know, really taking the time of however long it's been to do this does mean a lot to me. So thank you for that. And again, just a reminder to anyone, do your research. If you have internet to be able to watch this, then you have internet to be able to try to find resources to help you. And I strongly advocate for that. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ori. Is there anything else?
Just that I will give you a couple of links to put in the description of your YouTube video in case people
Wonderful.
are interested in learning more.
Sure.
So you can look forward to that along with this video. And thank you so much for letting me ramble on about this, and
of course, it's very important,
for being the wonderful and supportive partner that you are, because it's amazing that you chose to use your platform to share something that's so important and fundamental to me.
right? I mean, you know, I'm totally not hoping to get something out. No, I'm kidding. All right. All right, everyone, be safe, be well, and we'll see you in the next episode of Life Talks. Bye, babe.
Bye.